Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Kay. I work on e-flux Journal, and I'm so glad to be able to introduce tonight's speakers. So in her recent e-flux Journal essay on Jessie Jeffrey Dunn Rovinelli's film So Pretty, McKenzie Wark recalls first meeting Jessie. McKenzie writes that the most memorable thing that Jessie relayed when they initially talked in person was a desire to make a cinema that precludes the possibility of rape. In the essay, which is titled Femme as in fuck you, McKenzie goes on to say that So Pretty, in fact, attempts to invert the genre of the meta-rape film. For this and other reasons, she says of the film, quote, "This is a utopian cinema then, to the extent that this is possible. The first principle of utopia as a genre is the exclusion of violence." Tonight, Wark and Rovinelli will discuss, among other things, pretty as a minor aesthetic category, the realities of rave culture, I think, and also rape culture, and what that all means in deep relation to art in general and to trans art in particular. The word pretty is pretty trans, McKenzie writes in her essay. And after clarifying that she doesn't reduce So Pretty to just a trans film, although it's also that, and that the genre of trans art has difficulty with, well, genre, she says, Robin, and transience, all of it. It really is. She says, Rovinelli asks what trans films usually don't. What if what had to transition was the world? It's a pretty image, delicately colored, of a little world as what could be. Please join me in welcoming McKenzie and Jessie to e-flux.
Hello. Oh, that's live. Thank you, Kay. It's a pleasure to be back at e-flux, which always feels like my other home. You know, it's like my Manhattan pied-à-terre. I love it here. Hi, Jessie. It's kind of lovely we get to do something together.
Yeah, it's so rare we get to.
Yeah, I know.
It's a lie. We get to share space all the time.
So we were going to talk about three things, and maybe we'd start with rave culture, and probably worth saying you dragged me back to it, which I had not done, something I had not done since the 90s. Yeah. And it struck me as really intriguing that there would be a cinema that has a connection to that. And maybe we should start with a little bit of the film to give us kind of a sense of that, and then we can like open up that as a kind of an aesthetic. Unless you want to say something about the work in general.
No, I'll follow it up after we show the clip. So yeah, we're going to show I think the clips are going to be terribly non-chronological. So for those of you that haven't seen the film, I'm sorry. So this is a rave scene.
We should ask who has seen So Pretty. Nobody. All right. Well,
all right. Let's do a little
screening in December.
So it screens at December 5th and 15th at Anthology Film Archives as a part of their Cinema of Gender Transgression series, which is a wonderful ongoing series there. The film is an adaptation of a 1980s novel by Ronald M. Chernow, who is a gay communist writer. He was the last person to ever emigrate from West Germany to East Germany because communism was important to him. And so I've set the film in New York in 2019. It's no longer for cisgender gay men, but a sort of coterie of faggots and dykes of various assigned genders. And the film attempts to do what Chernow attempts to do, which is to reformat the present, to imagine a utopia, but not in the sense of futurity, but in the sense of a lived reality that we are currently experiencing. So he performs this radical act of defining one's current milieu as utopian without changing anything, and doing so artistically and doing so through the act of writing. And so I've tried to create a dialogue with him where the text that he's written will butt up against, contradict, reinforce the world that the people in my film are building. So it's a love story. It's for people with some romantic difficulties and a little bit of politics.
And utopia is in Ridgewood.
Yeah, it turns out the best place in the world is Ridgewood, Queens, which is not in Brooklyn. So here's a rave. Who doesn't love a rave? Should we do the little intro?
Yeah, I like the little intro bit to this.
We'll do the little intro. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well. I'd always had translated it,
I think
the
we
word
can-
Zweisamkeit in the final, in like the sort of epigraph that everybody loves from the book, as like coupledom.
Yeah.
And then this morning Raoul was like, no, you really need to be translating it as togetherness. And basically he was like, well, I really think that these things are like meant in a positive sense. And I was like, no, this is like, the sentence is really obviously meant to be negative. But I guess then there's like another question. So I guess I was like, what do you think?
We have to think about like what it means in the context of the book specifically. Right. And it seems to me that it's super important that it has this idea of two in it, because the word is like it's formed in response to or like in relation to the idea of Einsamkeit, meaning.
I want sandwiches.
You look really confused. What?
I want sandwiches.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm waiting out here.
Can you get under the...
Want anything? No. And I'm kind of like, okay, so maybe he doesn't mean like coupledom, like the couple form or whatever, but he's definitely talking about like a paired relationship, right? It's like a romantic partnership. He's not talking about like, you know, the love share between a group. If he was talking about that, then he would have used like a different word that doesn't have this two in it, right?
I mean, that's what I would think. Because you would think, like, if Schopenhauer really wanted to write about togetherness, he could have used a more general term like gemeinsam. Because the point is, Schopenhauer chose this really interesting and ambiguous word, which we don't really have in English.
Yeah.
And so you just have to sort of choose what you think makes sense in relation to the book, whether you want to emphasize the idea of coupledom or togetherness.
Yeah. I mean, the only vehemence that I have is I don't care.
Well, but you gotta make a
Sometimes
choice.
is enough, right? Yeah, like, ultimately I had to pick one word, and this one works for what I want to say. So
Okay.
it's my translation, I can do what I want.
Just give the CH.
Don't lead me
Music. Franz embraces Paul, pulls him close, dances. Turns, sings. The place is much too small. Stretches his arms to the camera. Paul takes part. The crowd parts.
gives us a few things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there are a few cinematic representations of space of the rave, but the thing I love is just like the little space between the bodies were like really quite close. I'm thinking of like Morven Caller, which is doing like more individual wandering through big crowd kind of thing. You know, it's a very different kind of vibe, and it's more about the character. Whereas this to me is more about the relation of the bodies to each other. And so, but what I'm interested in is how do you get from, like I kind of think of the space of the rave as like dialectical opposite of fucking cinema. It's just the completely opposite thing. Like the lack of clarity between, you know, the scene and the seer is the whole point. So yeah, how do you get from rave culture to cinema and back again?
Yeah, there's actually a lot to unpack there. First, I'm going to stroke my own ego a little bit. We were lucky enough to use some music from Eris Drew, who's a wonderful producer and DJ, and in the film, not here, but elsewhere. And she happened to be at Berlin playing Berghain when we premiered at the Berlinale. So we were lucky enough to have her come to one of the screenings, and she cried and spoke afterwards a little briefly. And she said that, you know, she's, as many of us who are interested in club culture, we've seen a lot of films about raves, and they always fall flat. And what she said, which really spoke to me, was she said, what you've done in this scene is you've showed us individuals alone with others, that they are allowed to hold space, and then hold that space to move and to move in the presence of others. Because so often in cinema, the rave is seen as a place of this of sensuality, but of sexuality. And what's interesting about the rave is that it's sensuality, and it's sensuality through a mediated environment, through a sound and light and social geographic space. So I was very happy that she had connected with that and she had understood with that. And that was something that I was thinking about very much in terms of thinking about how does one not just film a rave in cinema, but how does a rave allow us to think differently about cinema? When you go to a rave, you know, traditionally we're told as art students, as filmmakers, as the sorts of idiots who think a rock concert is important, that that what you know what the artist, the musician, the filmmaker is doing is important, and it's not. Well, it is, of course, but when you go to a rave, there's music playing, there's a DJ, perhaps you know the name of the DJ and you're going to see this particular DJ, but you learn very quickly when you go to these spaces that going to see a good DJ at a bad club, you might as well not go. They'll play great songs, the music will be incredible, and you'll have a terrible time and you'll leave after an hour. And you've wasted your money and you bought like a $15 cocktail that was disgusting.
We've all been there.
So what's interesting about the rave, what it teaches us is what sound art and other forms of installation art have often tried to teach us and failed, which is that you go to a space and it's about the interaction of music, lights, sound, but more importantly, and this is where it became interesting, about how you move through the space. And so it's about how you move, how you interact, how the sound changes depending on where you are in terms of a speaker, in terms of if you're too fucked up and you need to go outside and have a cigarette, in terms of who finds you and takes care of you when you're too fucked up and need a cigarette, or who you just chat with about whatever you were doing that week. And these are random encounters that require very much the space of the rave and require very much the audio and visual capacities of the rave in order to function. And then you can add drugs to this, and that's a whole other vector. And so the cohesive art of a rave is not the DJs on the stage or the music, but the interaction of these things. So then you go to film, and film is a very different medium. Film is a flat screen, you sit in the audience, you receive it. It's nice if you see it in a theater because there are other people there and maybe they laugh, like we're at a talk and you think I'm funny, and that's nice. But it's not really social in the same sense. But I tried to think like, okay, I was drawn to cinema, and what is this commonality? Like, can we find a commonality between these sorts of spaces that deprioritize the work of the artist on the stage and speak more towards building? When you make a film about utopia, then again, you're thinking about creating spaces. So what became interesting to me about the rave environment, not just how to depict it on the screen, but in terms of what it taught us about art, was that having a variety of responses to film form is important and exciting, and to create a space that is open that you can have different interactions with. Like, maybe you find my film boring, and parts of it are boring, though less boring than my last film, and maybe you fall asleep. And this is something one can do in a club space as well, if one is simply tired. And ideally, if the space is safe enough, then you'll be able to do so without risk of physical harm. And I hope that my film creates a space where you can fall asleep as well. It becomes a way to think about what do we do when we make a space where you are allowed to enter it from multiple angles. and you're allowed to interpret it in various ways. And this can be somewhat of a cliche in art, but thinking about something as practical as a rave becomes a much more useful way of talking about it. So anyway, that's where I started with the rave. Maybe McKenzie can draw more out of me.
Well, and then there's film as minimally choreographing bodies and camera together in a space where there's, presumably some agency that your actors had into how they would move through that. And that seems to me to draw a little bit from rave culture as well, right? Because like you can program certain things about the environment, but how people dance in it, you're just really trying to select people who will know how to do that, which you've also done.
Yeah, so when I shoot a scene, there's a very strict list of things that have to happen, but how they happen is left up to my performers. They will do what they will. And instead of a DJ, I had a choreographer, and the choreographer adamantly refused to give them any instructions, but she would give them games to play. She would give them a space in which to interact. Yeah. Right,
and I guess the other, it's not so much an analogy, is the same sort of aesthetic space where, raves are not really about people's interiority. They're more about bodies and ambiences. And I think in a sense, you're doing something similar in cinema. We're sort of not really the camera is not sort of like crushing in on someone to, reveal an interior state. It's kind of like these are how bodies interact in space.
Yeah, raves are loud, right? You can't understand other people at the rave.
Thank God.
Thank fucking God. And so when you're at the rave, you're interacting with surfaces, and we have this sense that superficiality is something that is bad. We've been told this over and over again, that superficiality is anti-political, that it is capitalist, that it is all of these various things. But what So Pretty attempts to do, and maybe raves do as well, is what happens when you have to interact with somebody on the materiality of their body. And this is important for bodies that maybe exist in so much as they are able to create their own materialities. So it was exciting to make a film space where you had bodies that were allowed to exist at a distance, but very strongly in their physicality. So when making the film, it was always about presenting a body at such a distance that one could not read that body's interiority or that body's subjectivity. One could guess at their emotions or their desires, but one would never get the context such that one could understand the person as a person. So I think, we've been told that superficiality is this capitalist urge to buy things. But I mean, everything can be a capitalist urge, and so it became much more interesting to think, can we speak politically through the surface, through the screen, be that screen the flesh of a human body, the extra flesh of clothing, or, the white screen.
Maybe there's a way to segue there from superficiality to pretty, easier word to say. Because the film is very pretty, the people in it are very pretty, the way the shots are constructed, more importantly, are very pretty and have a kind of consistent aesthetic as well. And should we find a little piece that sort of reveals some of those qualities?
So we're still debating what the second piece should be.
Yeah,
so I'm gonna pick someone on the fly.
I have like 9 favorite scenes, and we're not gonna have time.
Do you want to see close up? I'm kidding. 1 second. So we are going to do this one. Oh, look at the butts.
Yeah, that opening scene is good.
No, we're doing that one later.
We're not doing that. All right. Don't argue with filmmakers.
We're going to do this one.
Oh, you like that one? Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do
and
that
we get a bit of...
All right.
To Erica, and Erica is painting. Both are at a meeting for the organizers of the local committees. The organizers listened to the report of the district committee representative, and Paul thought, why can't we elect someone with stylish glasses? Erica thought, I would like to kiss him. But this is a film after all, and people don't think in those. The people around them are happy that Paul and Erica are a couple. Paul and Erica are also happy that they are a couple, especially Erica. But Erica is also more nervous. One of the party members emphasized that the youth must join the movement. And now we must find out where they are. we should all be communists. Everywhere the youth are, we should be. In the bars, in the workplaces and offices, in the concerts and cinemas. We should make sure the movement is everywhere. The situation is quite stressful. Paul and Erica look very different from the rest, and they feel it.
And that Rishika, who plays Erica, that's her music, just had an album out, yeah?
No.
No, it wasn't.
Soon, very soon.
It's not out yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, this music is on an album called Themes from a Film, which, interestingly, was not this film.
That seems totally appropriate.
Yeah, that's why I took it.
Yeah. All right, and then a little bit of background. So you play Tonia.
Yes.
Based on the character Tonio in the
Yes.
original Shonakao novella. And then your character is also adapting it in this presentation that happens in a park. So there's a sort of weird doubling interiority where a character in the story is actually producing a version of it.
Yeah.
And then we get a little framing about the utopian and a model of communism that Shonakao's from the 80s. And then we're basically in, a kind of cinematic Ridgewood in the space of more of an aesthetic than a politics too. There's a way in which the characters in this film are interested in whether this world is extendable beyond these intimate spaces politically, maybe, but aesthetically, I think yes. There's like a will to kind of push this out into the world. And here we have the photos, which I always imagined by the Paul character, the Erica character played by Rishika, whose music we're hearing. Flowers are a little motif that runs all the way through it, and we get one of the little versions of that. Maybe I want to start you with the flower motif as like one of your sort of classic versions of what's pretty.
The flowers are funny. This film is like very poured upon, but the flowers actually just come from our production designer. But because when we made this film, we were lucky enough to have an apartment, not this apartment, but the apartment that you see where they're showering earlier, that we shot the majority of the interior scenes in the film, and that was an apartment that somebody had half moved into, and so it was perfect. We loaded their shit out and moved our things in, and we're able to design this domestic space that nevertheless contained elements of an actual group of people living in it. And there were a lot of flowers there, and so we made a decision to bring those flowers out, and so you'll see them across the film. There was also a lot of fake flowers, and that was me. Once it was suggested to me that we pull these flowers out, I said, okay, but make sure they're fake. Not all of them, because real flowers are beautiful, or pretty, but fake flowers are really pretty, right? Because fake flowers exist simply to provide that accent of a flower, not like the image of a flower, rather. You put them in a room because you want to have a flowery room, not because you want to have a specific flower that carries a specific weighted meaning. You want the fake flower because it simply provides a flower. And it's false, but it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're moving through a room, it's a flower. And they break down this idea of the false and the real in a really nice way, and they're also just pretty. It doesn't matter.
And
They are flowers.
The first clip we showed, there's a little bit of the characters talking about taking liberties with translation, which goes all the way to the title, right? So this, so schön is the title of the German text, you've made it so pretty, rather than so beautiful. And I always found that was really like to get us out of, beautiful is such an overdetermined category in Western aesthetics, and we just sort of move that aside a little bit. And maybe the pretty can be something a little different, where a kind of play with appearances that don't have to add up to unity of form and all that. Maybe it's something you can break into its parts. Maybe it's something that's temporary and passing. Maybe it's event-based, like raves are maybe possibly pretty in a way that they're not beautiful, is a thought I've had lately.
They're not beautiful.
No, they're not. Like, why? They don't have that unity of form. And
yeah, when we first met, you had asked me about Shen Nagai's, our aesthetic categories, the zany, the cute, and the interesting, and that was interesting that she had brought that up when we first met, because that was one of the foundational impulses for this film was, okay, well, if, she writes...
Should ask if people know this book, Shen Nagai's, what's it called? Our Aesthetic Categories. You heard of this one? And it's about 3 aesthetic categories, which are the zany, the interesting, and the cute. Of which it's not those 3, but
no,
are there other
one.
minor aesthetic categories is the question it really begs, where you're outside of the beautiful and the sublime and so forth. Is there a way to sort of unpack that and get more traction, if you like, by thinking the aesthetic in a different way?
And the way I came to this was very, I go to translate it, and people are like, what are you going to call your film? And, the correct translation would be So Beautiful, but to make a film called So Beautiful, it's, how could one do that? And also, how could one do that? One would inevitably fail.
Well, and it's taken. There's the bold and the beautiful. There's a lot of films with beautiful in it, and, I think it's kind of done.
And to be beautiful, right, you're confronting everybody else that's beautiful, and you're confronting 100 years of art history. There's no way to get away, right? And if you're pretty, then you can escape a little bit. Then you don't have the same responsibilities. When you're tricky, you can be clever. You can be evasive. You can be slight. And so that was the goal of the film, was to make something that was pretty. And to see what could be possible is pretty sneaky, as McKenzie excavated in her article in the etymology of the word. And then so you see this scene where you have, this is the most overt politicizing of the film. We're reading these texts from the novel about we should all be communists and how we can build a youth movement and all of this. But they're talking about glasses, and then we see, a vase. We see Erica and Adam's beautiful face, pretty faces, and we see this little collection of photographs. And we see this meme. We see a meme. We see eating ass is the only ethical consumption under capitalism.
And it's true.
Yeah, why do we love memes so much? Why are memes like the space for that politics are done so much among young people? They're done in these inane, self-defeating, snide memes, and maybe we could think of those things as pretty. They're like a bon mot, and maybe this becomes a way that we can do politics when politics in the grand sense seems increasingly undoable.
There's one on the throw pillow too. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, what is that? It's the wine is the something about wine.
I can't remember. Yeah, but there's
a wine joke in there too. Life is too short to drink bad wine, but can I drink bad
pretty,
wine?
Right? Wine should be pretty as well. Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Ironically, all these characters do drink bad wine, but they like good wine.
Right. And I will just note that, and one presumes it's the character. Erica's liquid estrogen goes by in 2 shots here and a 3rd shot elsewhere in the film. There's like little Easter eggs, about the details
For
of
all my
lines.
trannies in the audience.
Yep. Yeah. Of which there is a shortage at the moment. That we're just discussing. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's an estrogen shortage, not a tranny shortage. To be clear. There's an ever-increasing supply of trannies. Bless your hearts.
Can we think of raves as pretty though? Can we connect those 2 things together?
for the purpose of sitting on stage, it would be certainly convenient if we
It
could,
would be
right?
convenient, yeah. But maybe there's another minor aesthetic
I don't
want
know if
for
they're
rave
pretty.
culture.
Do you think they're pretty?
No, it doesn't quite. It's not where I go
They're
to,
not
but-
sublime, though.
No, definitely not. And that's,
One
yeah.
gets the sense that if one took enough drugs, one could approach the sublime, but that would, I think, be the wrong way to approach a rave. Both
Well-
like physically, but also aesthetically speaking.
But that's what I said when I went back, right? Because I said, I think this is better than it was in the 90s. And I meant that. But I think the problem with rave in the 90s is people were looking for the sublime, which
Yeah.
is why you got so incredibly high and fucked up. And you didn't get it. Like, it didn't actually happen,
Drugs are
So-
a very useful tool, but they're a terrible
Right.
route to the sublime.
Yeah, exactly. Like that like doesn't work, right? But something that's a little bit more modulated, where the techniques are a little more measured and minimal, and there's a minimal quality. Maybe that's the key. But I
I
don't
mean,
know
intensity is certainly a part of these things,
Yeah.
right? Like, in certain ways, you can think of rave spaces as like a bar space intensified. You have communication and you have bodies in a room, but you get to X out the flirtation, thank fucking God, and also just sort of the chatter, and you get to amp things up on a sonic and visual level. That doesn't quite seem pretty, but it's also not beautiful. I don't know what that is.
I know, right? But we've got to come up with an aesthetic category for that.
Yeah, is it zany?
It's not. Like, it's...
Actually, it might be zany. It is a lot of reckless
depends
motion.
how speedy the molly is. I think that's the answer. That does get that way, but that's not good.
We don't want
Yeah.
zany.
No,
though.
we don't want zany.
No, zany's embarrassing.
But yeah, like footnote to pick up on later is and in Sian Nai, there's always a kind of way that these aesthetic categories interact with the possibilities of, call it what you like, late capitalism. Like I thought in the pretty, there's a way that you can detach appearances from that sense of, the product has a wrapper, and then we're always critiquing how it doesn't fulfill the desire it's supposed to. Well, pretty is just pretty. It's not pretending to be something it's not. It just is, Useful for thinking about transness, right? Because it's not like we're trying to be something else. We just are. This is what we are. And we're pretty,
And also
Take or
going
leave it.
back on that, I think when you think we're talking about intensity for that moment, and this is something the film can't avoid doing either, right? Like when you try to create a world that you want to live in, there is something of the intense in that. Even if what you're searching for is something pretty, something minor, something lowered and safe, there's always going to be this search for intensity. And what's interesting about these rave spaces, but also what I hope I can do in a film like So Pretty, is that it provides this modulation between a certain emotional intensity and a certain marginality and a certain minor vector. Because that allows you to exist, but also to feel those things that you're reaching towards at the same time in the present rather than the futurity.
So intensity good, but you're not trying to touch the infinite. That might be the...
Exactly, yeah.
It's intensity desacralized a little bit, No more of that Georges Bataille thing where we're
Yeah.
trying to
And I'm really bored about talking about trans experiences, and so as much as you're going to push me there, I'm going to always push back. But I think there is like one of the risks in the especially the Western medicalized transgender experiences, this idea that there's a futurity. It's always aimed towards a futurity. If I can gain this body, if I can gain this set of tools, then I will be this, and my problems will end. And this is wrong on a very personal level, but it also ignores the aesthetic tools that have been given to us by our ancestors and the artists that have come before us. And film, as many of the other art forms, becomes a way to create new selves now, and more importantly, to reframe the aesthetic conversation. I mean, what's exciting about art is that with art, you can reframe a body by making art. And it gives us a much broader set of tools and a much more open set of possibilities. And for me, making this film was an attempt to snatch futurity back. That's why this utopia is never projected in the future. It's about declaring it as something that is now.
which are probably the only utopias we have left, right?
The other ones never happen, so.
It's like, and build it now, it probably won't scale, but, like, right? Yeah, I was kind of thinking, like, what's the minimal unit of achievable communism is probably measured in beats at raves in terms of their duration and the distance over which it'll carry. So about 5 hours and 200 feet, you've got communism. But beyond that, it just doesn't really kind of scale anymore.
But there is something that about in terms of loops and repetition versus narrative trajectories and arcs, right? Like the idea of a narrative, like companies have narratives now. They all have a narrative. And so if you're going to make a film about utopia and about something that's anti-capitalist, it felt very important to approach it on the level of the beat. So the scenes in this film, as you may have noticed, tend to be long, they tend to be drawn out. And the idea is to give you a beat to exist in rather than chasing this increasing intensity of narrative arcs. So I guess now that I'm saying that, I'm realizing there's always this tension between intensity and holding space, intensity and holding space.
Right, with maybe a little more attention to holding space.
Yeah.
But that's probably a good thing. And there's now I think about it, there is something going on in terms of the abstractness of a music like techno that doesn't really do narrative. Like it does have breaks, but it doesn't,
Yeah, that was at the core of the film, was thinking
Right.
about, like, can you use techno and ambient structures as a way to tell a story instead of this sort of crescendo that is the
Right.
drive increasingly of contemporary film.
Right, and so you've kind of like transposed that relation to temporality into cinema, but it's as if you've drawn the beats out to 4 minutes between beat, rather than 180 beats per second.
Yeah, the BPM of this is like lower than 1, but
Yeah, it's like seconds per beat, right? Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, but it's like that's really interesting to me, just in terms of the way artists think, right? And it's like, well, you take this aesthetic experience over here, and what happens if you just completely invert it and turn it into another form somewhere else? But there's something to do with form.
Oh, that's what we did.
Because-
That was the structure. We sat down and we took the script and we color coded it with like kick, hi-hat, et cetera. And then, you have to actually make a film, so you can't really do it. But you can, to a large degree, and that's where these camera movements back and forth come from.
Oh my God! Like the whole thing is just basically
Yeah,
a
the
rave,
whole thing is
in cinematic form.
It's a dance.
It's a dance. Yeah.
And I think that's something that we can lose sight of in talking about raves and raves culture, is that the dance is at the core of it, and it is a dance in a very classical sense.
It'd be kind of fun to think about this as a dance film in relation to other dance films.
That's how I made it.
Right.
There was a point shortly before making the film where, for various reasons, I felt incapable of making this film. And then, in order to allow myself to make it, because you have money and you have to do it, because otherwise the people that have given you money will be very angry at you, I decided that it would be a dance film. And so I hired this choreographer who would work on every scene, and that allowed me to get back to bodies, that allowed me to get back to movement, and that allowed me to have hope, because I was so terrified of making like a trans film. Like, that was so depressing. Not just like, that's the way to give yourself no future. But dances move. They have, then you can go somewhere. So.
But that's why, as a newly minted trans woman, I loved it, is because it wasn't a trans film.
Yeah.
Right? But it just happened to have some
Yeah, I don't
trans
have
characters
anything
in it.
against Yeah, I mean, that's the point, right? It's to open space where you can be and become, and that's much more exciting than reifying your category.
Yeah, and it's maybe not even all that relevant which of the characters you read that way. When I was writing about it, it was like, what I was trying to say is these characters read this way to me, but I don't know. Like, they're not telling me. Maybe that one's trans, maybe that one isn't, but it's not really terribly relevant. They're
My
just in
dad
it.
said something really cute. He was watching the film, and he was like, I was about 15 minutes in, I just realized that I had to give up figuring out what anyone's gender was because they weren't going to be helpful.
Success.
I thought that was really nice.
Yeah.
But actually, that's part of the point, right? Because then maybe you can actually go somewhere, because there's nothing more stultifying than being stuck in the muss of figuring that out.
I got the title for writing about it from a protest sign that the Tonya character holds up, which does in fact say "Femme" as in "fuck you." So that does give you a slightly different language, and language. But then to connect the femness and the pretty together a little bit, how's that sit in your head?
Well, for some context, the sign that at one point you see my character holding a sign that says "Feminism, fuck you," and she's an idiot and she's not covering her face with it like everybody else is. She gets made fun of. But that was a sign that I made when I was at the protests on J20, for Trump's inauguration, which were an interesting moment in American politics. And it was a moment, I had just come out and I was starting to, accept the fact that I desperately did not want to be a man anymore. But you're being there and you're there at the Women's March, and there's this whole conflicted relationship between yourself and institutional feminism that wants to accept you and has absolutely no idea. And so the Femme became a way to sort of not answer the question for myself, I think partially out of fear, but also as a way of like making space, because anybody can be Femme. To be Femme isn't easy, but it's like pretty. It's a small category. You don't have to be the grande dame to be Femme.
Thank God, I couldn't pull that off.
I think you probably could.
I don't have the time. Yeah, I went to the Women's March in a pink hat, but it didn't have the bunny ears. It's kind of like, just like trying to be a walking contradiction.
This is just the...
And that's before I'd come out, too.
As yet unrolled condom hat.
Right, exactly.
I don't know what that metaphor means. It's just what it looks like.
Right.
Don't interpret that metaphor.
So you're resistant to thinking the trans piece with this, though, right?
No, I mean, we can do it a little bit.
Right.
It's a as an artist, and especially as a filmmaker, film is a specific category. We live in a time where on television diversity is very much prized, but it's diversity within a certain very delimited range of aesthetic and narrative categories. And in feature filmmaking, there just really aren't any trans people, and the diversity in feature filmmaking in general is just pathetic. 4% of directors are female at all. But the problem is that when you make a film as one of a very, very small number of trans female film directors, we've talked about this, right? Like, you lose the ability to speak as an artist, and you lose the ability to speak from this transcendent category that everybody hucks at the white male. Like, the white male is like the philosopher. A philosopher is always a white male, because a philosopher can speak from the point of impunity, the point of being unmarked. And as a trans artist, you're always being marked. And this can be something that can be interesting to play with. When you're one of a few, you do get to, like, get away with things in certain ways, but also in certain ways one can never truly speak. I'm not saying that everyone should. I would rather just get the philosopher off his throne. Sorry,
right.
But to have one's films to be only able to speak on the topic of being trans, this becomes very deadening. Not because I talk about being trans all the time. I mean, this is what trans girls do, or at least white trans girls do. But
yeah, that needs to be said. Yeah.
But God, I'd be a boring artist if that's all I did.
Right.
And every minority artist struggles with this. But oof, can they love to write theories about trans. We symbolize so much, and it's so boring.
Yeah.
And wrong.
If I become that writer, you have permission to smack me.
Yeah, I will. But then I'm going to scam you out of a lot of money.
That's on record now.
I'm not going to slap you. I'm just going to scam you out of all the money I can. I think that's more proper for our day.
That would be more proper. Yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, but I mean, the last thing I want to do as a writer is create a category that art can't get out of. Like, that would really not be the point of, to me anyway, of writing about things.
But if one's going to do trans art, which I fully intend to do, I will continue to include trans bodies in all of the art that I do. Because we need to see those bodies on the screen. And I'm not the best person to do it, but I'm better than most people to do it, for pathetically obvious reasons. But I'm interested in an art that is able to sustain an investigation into those bodies and their movements rather than into the category in which they fall, either as philosophical category, a political category, as an aesthetic category. It's kind of cool, though.
Yeah, I think there's still some unexplored aesthetic territory there, but yeah, how does one do this without... I mean, there's, as you say, the unmarked position of the philosopher is like white guys. You get to be the marked category who gets to only speak about these particular things. But the third step has always got to be like the third move, where you kind of reclaim the possibility of not so much universality, but of a generalized gaze from a specific point of view that's not that of the white guy. So I think that's always kind of like the move.
And we were I was asking you recently, like, is this like faith or something?
Yeah, well, I don't know if we're quite ready to go
No,
there
none of us
yet.
are, but-
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just thinking about like how do we crawl back into the shell of the universal, right? Once we know it doesn't exist.
Right.
It'd be a fun gesture to do.
Yeah. Well, and can you do it through something like minor aesthetic categories, or they do open up spaces, but they not open up spaces big enough? Then what would be the next?
And trans bodies do open up new ways of thinking about bodies. I mean, there's a reason that theory has latched onto them with such glee.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is the way that is what they actually do, what they think of above and beyond themselves, not in terms of gender, but in terms of moving through the world. Yeah.
All right, do we want to show a little more film before we
let's
ask
show
the
a little
audience
film.
to
Which
come
one do
join
you
us?
want to see,
What do you
Mackenzie? This is
see?
Mackenzie's carte blanche.
Really?
Yeah,
Well,
I'm
but
gonna let you have it.
since it's apropos, I kind of really love Tony in a helmet on the bench.
We knew she was going to do it. She wants to talk.
Really?
No, you're going to get it.
I get what I want.
She gets carte blanche. So the backstory to this is that this is the scene that is most overtly about being trans.
But it's also a beautiful scene.
It's also a beautiful scene.
And
it's very
you act in
personal.
it too, which
I
is...
act in it,
Yeah.
which another reason I don't want to show it. But she gets what she wants.
All right, a little bit of make-out here is also lovely.
Oh, yeah, look. My boyfriend is some kind of cheating on me.
Flowers. Probably can't see, but there's flowers on that.
There's flowers.
Each embraces the other completely. One with their legs around the other. One with their lips upon the other. One just as pretty as the other could be.
We thought we should always think of each other. And we had to. But then we didn't have to. If we were with each other, we were with others too. Or we were always with each other. It works because it works with the others.
I woke up this morning and I wasn't in his house. And I got up and I went to the mirror and I looked at my naked body. And I saw my shoulders and my breasts and my hair. And my legs and my calves and my feet. And I was so unclear on what I was seeing and what was looking back at me. I don't think it's that he doesn't love me or whatever anymore. He's just made a situation that feels kind of unsustainable and is really weird with me only being here for a little bit and he's leaving soon. So I'm not really mad at him, but I do feel I don't know, I feel I'm kind of adrift. I had him for so long, for years now, and he'd become kind of like a rock that I oriented myself around, that I had an understanding of who I was because I had this relationship with him. And as my body changed, I could just at least compare that body to him and have him
touch me and feel me, and it just kind of gave me a sense that, I existed. And that I was a woman, or that somebody would keep seeing me through different bodies, and that there was like some sort of continuity to myself. And now that I feel like that's probably gone, I feel really, I don't know, I feel really lost. And I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm losing track of my body, and I'm like losing track of the way people see me, and I'm just like, I feel really scared in a way I didn't feel before. Figure it out, I guess. I hope it works out.
Okay, very well.
Thanks, bud.
You're welcome.
It's just so pretty.
It
I
is
just
pretty.
love the way you constructed the shots, and it's actually not centered on Tonya at all, the character you're playing. And we see them from behind, we see them much wider shot.
You see her nails.
The face we see in close-up is the helmet character, played by Phoebe. Yeah.
Yeah, that was important, right? If this is the one moment in the film where you get to find anything out about anybody, really.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to stay back. I wanted to give her her space, and to see her, to still see her through the fabrics of her, of her, what she's wearing, and her hair and her nails.
Yeah, and it's kind of, the most sort of intimate piece of dialogue has this, really quite broad context that it happens in. And
But you
the
can see
cameras-
her and Helmet together, and that's important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, who's like a fifth character in relation to two couples.
Yeah.
Has a necessary role in terms of the two pairs who switch partners. That's sort of like I gave the story away. That's all that happens.
That's all they do. They just swap.
Yeah.
It's a couple swap. Oops.
Yeah.
But everybody ends up fine. That's the ending. Now the whole thing's ruined. Don't see it.
Yeah, it's like Psycho. You're not allowed to know what happens.
Yeah.
So I wonder if anyone's got thoughts out there out in the dark.
Oh, we're opening it to questions. Oh, I love questions.
Well, instead of, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's
I don't
do
wanna,
it.
I don't want to be
Yeah,
like
no.
social top here, but. Well, yeah, sure, yeah.
Oh, look at all you.
I feel like I'm now the film seeing the audience. It's like this weird,
Yeah.
reverse of the gaze. Yeah. Anyone got anything out there? Yeah. Go for it. Wait.
I'm really interested in the subway as a social space, and I was wondering if you could see qualities of the rave in whatever's going on in the subway.
No.
Really?
Yeah, I can see why you would make that connection, but I think that it's important to differentiate those two.
They're completely different.
Yeah, so I can see why you would make. So a rave is curated, right, by both in terms of the people who go, in terms of the programmer who books the DJs that are going to play, in terms of the audiovisual space. Subway creates room for random encounters. However, the basis of those is one, the movement of capital to flows of work primarily. During the day, it exists as something to move commuters around. And also, your chance interactions tend to be ones, you do see the occasional kind encounter, but certainly as a marginalized body, violence would be the most common thing that happens in the subway. So I think that while they might have similarities in terms of how bodies move and interact, the function that they play aesthetically and politically is quite different.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Maybe along those lines of violence, what do you think Pretty is evading? You said Pretty was evasive. It's certainly evading beauty and the sublime and the major aesthetic categories, but what else does it allow one to evade?
McKenzie, you want to try that first, and then I'll pop over?
Yeah, and the word pretty does have roots in that connected to a sense of being a little tricky, and it was originally a quality that is connected more to masculinity, and so it's like sort of, you know, the pretty character is tricky and a little masculine, and I had this little sort of slightly speculative genealogy where it gets identified with the feminine and with the commodity. And with the sense also of the salesperson or the commodity is fronting, is like putting up a false front, and that the essence of the commodity will somehow not live up to that. And that's also connected to both misogyny and transmisogyny of both women and, you know, cis women and trans women as fronting but not being what they pretend to be. And so you're, you know, always under a gaze that's trying to see what you're hiding, what the trick is, kind of thing. So there's a way in which misogyny and transmisogyny and the critique of the commodity actually have this uncomfortable relation to each other. So to what extent is the pretty, in terms of those gazes, avoiding revealing its rotten essence, is one logic of it, but the alternative is maybe the pretty is just evading that whole logic of trying to get out of the sense that it has to be connected to some essence that it, you know, is fallen from. What if there were just pretty appearances that one took exactly at their face value, without there having to be some kind of essence that's either sublime or ridiculous behind it? So the more interesting evading is evading the entire logic of essences and appearances. Like that, to me, is what the pretty might actually kind of promise in a way. And that does connect to a whole line of things aesthetic theory has tried to do for 20 or 30 years. But here I think it's a really new kind of wrinkle.
Yeah, I think a lot about makeup, right? Makeup can be used to make oneself beautiful, or it can be used to make oneself pretty. And there's often a lot of overlap between those two, but not necessarily. Pretty for me is playful, right? We think of pretty as being playful. It's also can be unnoticeable, right? We often think of the girl next door as pretty, and what's the idea of her is that she's hiding in plain sight or whatever, and she's sort of dodged you. And this is both the subject for the men to come and find, but it's also a way that we can hide in plain sight. So I'm interested in pretty as a way of like signaling, of winks, of nudges, of postures, rather than the sort of grandiosity of the sublime or the beautiful. So pretty becomes a way to communicate in secret, in public. And that can be very evasive in the same way that people flag, that they code, that we provide signs that a person or a space is safer. We can also code a certain way of thinking about the world through the ways in which we craft our own prettiness. And then with regards to filmmaking, it becomes a posture that avoids having to deal with the weight and responsibility that's been placed upon women in film history. I mean, the woman is the sacred object of film history. It is the object that exists to be violated, to be protected, to be held up as the image of beauty. And to be pretty for trans women, but hopefully also for cisgender women, becomes a way, filmically speaking, to dodge. And you've seen female filmmakers doing this throughout film history, particularly in the 90s, where the superficial, the bitchy, these became places where we could dodge the responsibility of being the whole to fuck.
So I imagine the two of you have talked about the film a great deal, both here, but then also just like personally. I'm wondering if there's places where you've sort of disagreed on things or seen things really differently, between being the filmmaker and somebody who's seen it and thought about it a lot, and what those are and what the conversations around those sort of different ways of seeing ended up with.
I wish we did. So far, we haven't had any big points of conflict. Except that Mackenzie's really a communist, and I'm not. I'm an anarchist. Yeah. Yeah. But we can get along for now. And don't worry, the revolution's never coming, so. Which is liberating.
Which one of us gets to shoot the other one if the revolution doesn't happen?
It really depends on who's winning, doesn't it?
Historically, the odds are on my side.
That's true. Yeah, but are you going to want to shoot me? I can picture you failing.
I may have less practice with guns.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I got one thing though, which is, there we go. No, it's not a disagreement. It's the thing that if you view it from the outside as someone who's going to write about it, you start to think that things have intentions, and in some filmmaking, everything does have intentions. But your filmmaking leaves a little room for events to happen in a sense. And so there's one shot I really love that's of you playing the Tonya character on a railway platform. That's really beautiful and it makes sense in the film, but it turned out the way the shot happened was kind of an accident. And so it doesn't take away from its role in it and why it's a beautiful shot. But it never occurred to me that that was unplanned. So there's a sense that because I don't have access to the process of its production, that you end up seeing it a little bit differently. So it's a different perspective. But kind of pretty, right, to have that difference.
This is such a good... See, this is a brilliant aesthetic category because you can just say it for anything. If you like it, you just call it pretty. In that shot, I walk onto a train platform and I read a book. And so for this film, I was functionally pregnant, and so I didn't really want to have long shoot days. And so I would nap on set a lot. And so we sent out the director to go, the DP to go shoot B-roll photography, and I walked onto the train station to go home as they were shooting. So we shot it. But the nice thing is when you have an extremely rigid visual style, it becomes totally possible to just have someone walk in, and that is sort of the way that the film works in general. I have a very, very, very strict visual language that we have to adhere throughout, but that means that when things that you don't plan for happen, they fit within the framework. And that is what McKenzie's talking to. That's about making sure that if you have like a rigid way of seeing, if you have a gaze that is constructed and modulated along these certain like beat structures throughout the film, then that gives you space for the little things that happen that you deliberately do not plan for to create connections across time and space, because they can reverberate because they have this resonating frame to exist in. And it's pretty. See, it works. It always works.
Yeah, it's a Forest Avenue stop, so it's kind of like make it a city film in a way. Yeah, that one shot.
Yeah. And then I choose to include the shot. You don't. Yeah. you do get to do that.
Hey, so I don't exactly know how to phrase this question, but I'm curious about, that the shot that says eating ass is the only ethical consumption under capitalism. And I'm just wondering, because you addressed beauty and beautiful and pretty and that kind of difference, like is there, like where is hotness in that?
That's a great question. Is it? Oh, fuck. I think that's despicable of me, probably, if that's true. Where's hotness, McKenzie?
You're very generous and open to what's included in that category.
Well, I guess I would say hotness is degree of initiating the desire to fuck, right? Like, because the beautiful can be this thing, be as much as it is like shaped, especially with regards to women, shaped by like patriarchal standards of desire. The beautiful is the woman that you marry, right? The hot woman is the woman that you fuck. The pretty woman, you have to figure out what you want to do with. Either way, you probably want to violate all three of them, but violate. But yeah, I guess that would be the vector of hotness. I think you can come up with non-rape vectors of hotness as well. The problem is that all of these categories, which is why I gravitate towards prettiness, are created under an environment in which, rape is the end of the equation. But I think all these characters are pretty. I do also think they're all really hot, but it's a slightly different thing. And the film does not attempt to show them as being hot, because as a filmmaker, you get to choose how to frame things. So making them hot was never necessarily the goal, although it's unavoidable with characters as hot as these. Myself excluded. I'm just saying that to save face. Yeah, hotness is a really tricky one, though, right? Like, because the vicinity to sexuality is really close, so that would be a really difficult one to work with. It's a volatile chemical, the hot.
I mean, there's a lot of quite evenly distributed sensuality in this film, but yeah, it's not really. And characters make out a few times and stuff, but it's really not focusing on that narrative structure where everything's set up, like hotness is the prelude to someone getting fucked, is not the structure of the film at all. It'd be one way to think about it. There's a much more evenly distributed, like beats and techno, like there's kind of like it just goes on, but it's pretty.
So in the rave scene, one of the characters is doing poppers, and so I was wondering, was that adapted from the movie as well, or from the novel, or was it something you improvised with, and why exactly this? I mean, why did you choose this exact thing?
I've been just dying for the day someone would ask about the poppers. I don't actually, does anyone in the audience know when poppers first came onto the scene? They certainly exist in the 80s. They definitely exist when this book was made. Yeah, you would know that. Well, I want to know what McKenzie thinks about the poppers in the film. Well, poppers are really gay, because they're for butt sex. But what's interesting about them is that people do them at raves not to have sex, because they just make you sort of like lose track of what's going on for a few seconds. And if there's a drug that I'm going to allow to be used in this film, it's poppers, because they're stupid, they're playful, and they just make you lose track for a little bit, and then everything comes back. So it's a drug that is good for this kind of film, because it allows us. They're like, I guess if we were to call a drug pretty, it's probably poppers, because they're so silly, and pointless in the way that being pretty is pointless. Yeah, but also like, if you're gonna do a rave scene in a movie and the people aren't straight, it's like there is a law from heaven that you have to do it, ever since William Friedkin made Cruising, a film about how poppers are really, really scary and they make you engage in piss play. You should really all go see William Friedkin's Cruising. It is the most incredible, accidentally not homophobic film. It's awesome.
Yeah, and that scene's got a killer soundtrack too. I always wanted to know what that track was. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I don't know about in the Schöneckau, but yeah, poppers were a huge deal in gay life in the 80s. Speaking from one of my failed attempts to be a gay man, which happened in that period. Yeah. And it was the thing you did in clubs too. Yeah.
Thanks. I had a question. You were saying that things were like strictly choreographed or planned out, but then you also said that games were given to like get people to do certain things. Can you elaborate what you meant by that?
Oh, just the camera is really strict. There are actions that have to happen in every scene, like everything is scripted to some degree, but the specifics of how things occur, like someone knows, like you have to make coffee in this scene, you have to you go get tea, whatever, but the specifics of how that happens, those happen independent of camera movement, so the camera is going to do what it's going to do no matter what the actors do. The camera, with the exception of these handheld shots that you've seen a few of, does not follow characters, and this is an important way to create distance, because typically cameras, right, are tacked to character movement, and this is a way of like aligning the viewer's eye with the subjectivity of the character. This is like classical film form. And so I like the idea of these camera that is always doing its own thing. It has its own mind, and that keeps you involved. It keeps you looping in the kinetic structure of the room, but it keeps you separate from the characters. And that, for me, was a nice way of sharing space without having to go inside. And then the games, there were different ones. There were verbal games where you would speak over each other. You would tell a story back to somebody in a different language while they were saying it. You would sit as close to somebody as you could without touching them. And some of these make their way on camera, and some of them just happen beforehand. I had asked the choreographer to give me a series of movement rules for each scene, and she was like, I know the way that you work, and you have too many rules. I can't make any more. So she did this instead. Yeah, but the goal of all of this is just to get to the politics of superficiality and the politics of bodies, to allow these bodies to breathe, and to breathe, most importantly in this film, to breathe alongside each other. Yeah, to touch in ways that feel exciting. I will never speak again. This is my last speaking engagement ever.
I was wondering if either of you would speak a little bit about the role of color in the film. That really struck me, like especially the photographs on the wall. Like I think when we think of photographs, we think kind of like a very standard, like with the flash, natural lighting, but there aren't at all, and even in the rave scene. But I was also really interested in the role color plays with like wardrobe and set pieces. And I wonder about how intentional some of those decisions were. Did you find that certain characters had like specific color palettes, or kind of how you created this sort of ecology of colors throughout the film that connect across the different scenes?
Well, I would love to know what McKenzie took from the color in the film, because I don't think we've actually talked about that much. So I'd love her like undiluted without me perverting it. So I'll let her go first, and then I'll speak to how we worked with color.
Uh-oh. No, it's because like you're a professional colorist, among many other things. You're in the credits like 5 times on this movie. One of the things you did was color it. So I'm like, what would I know? Although I do love that the Tonia character is in white throughout, except that one shot, because it's actually you as the director on the railway station rather than the character. But you kind of recognize the character, and somehow it seems significant that she was in black at the time, but it's actually completely arbitrary, but it works in the film. But it does have a really beautiful palette. We're leaving out the demonstration scenes that have a whole different kinetics and a different palette. That's true as well, right, okay, yeah, so those things seem connected. But there does seem to me to be something very intentional about it, but I'd rather you describe how you chose the palette for this, because you actually know how to do that, and like, I write in black letters on a white screen, so what would I know? And I can't even pick an outfit that matches, so.
McKenzie has great style. She's self-effacing again. She shouldn't do that. Bad girl. Yeah, so I work as a colorist. The colors in this film are quite intentional. But I'm also interested in the way in which colors mark space. I don't really believe in like this color theory that like reds create X emotion or blues create X emotion. I mean, they are cool or warm, but it's not even a good way to communicate temperature. So it's mostly just about delineating spaces, right? So you can use, and so that's why we have these bright color block spaces, so that in a movie where very often they're always spending time in the same apartment rooms, you have these color block spaces, so movement through the apartment becomes like clearly denoted by the shifting colors. And then, the rave scene, it has lights, and they create it very interesting because they shoot up bodies. One thing that we also did throughout this film is we'll be sticking colored gels, which is like very common in like 80s and 90s queer films, but we just did them and just turned them way down. So just getting people's skin tones sometimes a little bit out of the realm of reality, so they'll walk into this little pink light that we'll have hidden in a corner. And then there's the blue neon crops up throughout the film as well. And that was just about ways to key different spaces and then allow those spaces to infect one another, so that the world that the characters build can drip across scenes, can speak. I don't like bright colors, so I've just been trying to challenge myself lately. So this movie has bright colors. And then with wardrobe, I come from a documentary background, so characters bring their own wardrobes, and then we would lay them out. They would bring sort of what they kind of wanted to wear for each scene, and then me and the production designer would sit and pick. So again, it's giving myself those rules, so I have a very delineated field to pick from, and then you swap and key. So it's making sure there's a dialogue between me and the performer in terms of color and outfit. And then I allowed myself to allow characters to trade pieces of clothing. And, I think the reasons for that are probably pretty obvious. Yeah. Yeah, and then we shoot it on film, where everything just looks really, really pretty, and the colors are great.
Yeah, that's relevant. Mostly
shot on film, and film has, again, speaking about surfaces and superficiality, film like swirls, it moves, so it has a surface in a way that the digital does not. Digital has the screen, but it doesn't have that extra layer. Yeah. It's so pretty. Oh, we love silly questions.
Would you describe whippets as pretty or just hot?
Oh, that's the best. I don't think they're pretty. That's just not pretty. I think whippets are zany.
Okay.
Do you agree? Oh, sorry. The question was, are whippets, which is, they're... Thanks for coming, everyone.